Hello and welcome to your Cognition Part 2 notes, or 3 objectives for these notes. We are going to look at some vocab words, and then I want you to be applying them to the top concept or the overarching concept. So in these notes, 3 things. We're looking at confirmation bias and fixation and how those two things interfere with problem solving, right? So not just knowing confirmation and fixation, but what does that have to do with our ability to solve problems? How can representative and availability heuristics cause us to underestimate or, and spell ignore wrong, ignore important information, and describe the drawbacks and the advantages of overconfidence and decision makings. So lots of vocab words that I just went through here. So when you're in class or maybe when you're taking notes, make sure we know these things. So confirmation bias is going to be a vocab word. Fixation, problem solving, talked about last time. Heuristics we're learning about here. And then the drawbacks and advantages, so good and back, of overconfidence when we're making decisions. Okay? All right, so let's start out with our interfering with problem solving. So obstacles to problem solving. The word obstacles meaning like things that get in the way of being able to solve a problem. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is confirmation bias. I put a lot of the definitions just typed in here, so there won't be a lot of the boxes. What you need to know is basically in the PowerPoint. So a confirmation bias is our eagerness to search for information that confirms our ideas. We've talked about this a little bit already, but I want you to pay attention to this word eagerness, right? So what does it mean to be eager to search for information? That means like you are wanting to, like it's a desire, or like you're looking for information that confirms your ideas. All right, it's not it's like a passive thing. Confirmation bias is like, I know I'm right, here is the information that backs that up. Okay, that can get in the way. So what does that have to do with problem solving, right? If you're trying to solve a problem but you are convinced that you are right, or you're looking for information that is trying to back up what you already know is true, that can get in the way of solving problems. All right. In our last notes, we talked about your problem could be, a lot of times when you think about solving problems, it's like a math problem or something, but your problem could just be you are trying to grocery shop, right? Or you are trying to build something out of the supplies that you have, which we're going to do in class. So that is a problem, right? So a problem is anything you're trying to solve. Another thing that can get in the way, so confirmation bias can get in the way. Something else that can get in the way is fixation. So fixation is when you can't see something from a fresh perspective. You are unable to like get out of this this set that like you can't move past it. If you've ever been in like a math problem that like you're having a hard time solving, like you just can't figure out any other way to solve it. So you cannot see a fresh perspective. Now, 2 examples of fixation. So these mental set and functional fictionness are examples of fixation, so not being able to see from a fresh perspective. So mental set is our tendency to approach a problem with what we know works. All right, so our tendency to approach a new problem or try problem solving with what we know works. That's called a mental set. All right, this kind of can prime us for, I'll give you some examples, but prime you for what you will do with a problem. If you're solving, it could be helpful. If you're solving an algebra problem, and then you're moving on to go geometry, and you're trying to approach it in the same way as an algebra problem, it might not work. And if you can't get past that, your fixedness, you might have a hard time solving that problem. Now, functional fixedness, that is when our tendency to see an object or something as a fixed in its function. So for instance, like if you can't get around that a brick can be used not only to build houses, but can be used to be a doorstop, going back to your list. Or if you, like when we were in class looking at, if you couldn't get around that matches aren't or can't just be used for fire, or that tacks don't have to be used to push something in, that's functional fixedness, our tendency to be fixed in usual function. So this is only for that. People who are able to look outside, or it's called like think outside the box of this fixedness, have a better tendency to be able to solve problems. Okay, so here's some examples of a mental set. Remember we talked about here that I give you some examples. Your mental set here. So it could help with solving a problem, but it could get in the way. Remember, this is how I approach a problem. So what they did is they gave these two lines of letters and they asked, and so I'm going to ask you to do this, maybe write them down and try and solve it. So it's asking you, what are the next three letters in the sequence? So O, T, T, F, blank, blank, blank. Think about it. But once you're done and you're like, I just want to move on, as did I was trying to think of like words, like otter, fair. Like I was trying to spell something, right? So my mental set is that usually when they're looking for the last three letters, it's supposed to spell something. But the answer is that this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So the next letter would be F for 5, S for 6, S for 7. So the next three letters would be F, S, S, right? So what they were doing is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They actually spelled it out. So now that I know that that's what they're looking for, see if you can solve this one, which I was able to do a lot faster. And if you're having a hard time, think about what month it is. And then you realize that this would be January, February, March, April, May. So you know the next is June, July. So my mental set, knowing going in that I needed to be solving it in the same way as I solved this one, that helped me for the next one. My mental set going into this problem of trying to do this one right here with spelling something got in the way of me solving the problem. I wasn't able to think outside the box on that one. Okay? So now let's talk about heuristics, which is a fun word to say. And why do I spell everything wrong all the time? Goodness gracious. So making decisions and forming judgments. So using and misusing. Again, we're looking at the positive and negative of using heuristics. I want you to think of a heuristic as a mental shortcut. It is our brain's easy way to make decisions. So a mental shortcut. Should I take an umbrella today? Look outside. Is no clouds, no umbrella. So it's like using the things around you as clues or things that have happened in the past to make like a mental shortcut to make a decision. Now there's two different types of heuristics, right? You're going to look at the availability heuristic and the representative heuristic. This is a really long definition, so I typed these in here because it seemed like overwhelming for me. So the representative heuristic, think of like representing, right? This is judging the likelihood of things in terms of how well they seem to represent a prototype. All right, so this word prototype we talked about in our last notes. This is a typical representation of a concept. So we talked about the prototype for a bird would be like that it has wings, it can fly, and it lay eggs. That's your prototype for a bird. Now, so my representative heuristic would be like, I'm going to judge how likely this new thing may be a bird in terms of how well it matches my prototype. Okay, so if I'm trying to representatively heuristic something, I'm saying, does it match up with this definition of what I think a bird is? Okay, now this may lead you to ignore other relevant information. So maybe I decide that something new is a bird because it has wings or something that looks like wings, but maybe it doesn't lay eggs. Maybe it doesn't fly. All right, maybe it doesn't have 2 feet. But because I thought that wings equal bird, I'm stuck. I use that representative heuristic, thinking that that new creature that I find or that I see is a bird. All right, so that's my representative heuristic. It could mislead you to not look at other things. The availability heuristic is estimating likelihood of events based on their availability in your memory. Right? So how likely is that thing going to come to your mind? It makes it common to you if it comes to your mind quickly. Right? So the estimating the likelihood of an event based on how quick it is in your mind. So this chart right here is looking at asking people that say, like, what's the number one reason, or like, how do you think you're going to die? What are you scared about? Like, are our fears of death realistic? And people tend to be really scared of being killed, like homicides, because it's in our mind. It's what we think about, like, because we see it on TV, we see it in movies. Like, it's overrepresented in our brain because it's overrepresented in the media. They might be afraid of being killed by a terrorist because that availability of being like 9/11 or school shootings is very fresh in their brain. Okay, the likelihood of someone choking is really low. Terrorist attacks, really low. Homicides, very low. You're way more likely to die in an auto accident or because of suicide than you would be to be killed or attacked by a terrorist. But because that's more available in your brain, you tend to, that pops to mind first. Okay, so that's the availability heuristic, how available it is in your mind. So this could be different for different people. All right. Okay, so let's talk about overconfidence. So overconfidence is just this tendency, the heuristics, using those mental shortcuts, always thinking you're right leads to overconfidence. So mental shortcuts, thinking you're right leads to overconfidence. It is the tendency to be more confident than correct. More confident than correct. And this is, I joke about with you guys this all the time, like, oh, are you sure? Is that your overconfident bias? But people tend to, even when they make right decisions, want to stick with the decision that they made. They want to be right. So how they tested this, I tried to put this separate. So they would say, like, what is the answer to this multiple choice question? And then after that question, they would say, what is your confidence on how right you were? And people tend to rate themselves very high on their confidence. So I chose B and I'm 90% confident that that's sure. I chose A and I'm 100% confident. I'm 50% confident. But even on the wrong answers, they were pretty confident that they had the right ones because it was in their availability, their heuristics, their mental shortcuts, the tendency to want to agree with what you chose. And both of those things lead to something called overconfidence. And then there's a quote in your book I like, and it said, don't believe everything you think instead of believe everything you hear. That's funny. Okay? So last one is something called belief perseverance. So you have overconfidence, you have these heuristics. The belief perseverance gets in the way of forming judgments. It's our tendency to cling to things in spite of contrary evidence. So we want to cling to things that we feel are dear or right because, and then we ignore all the contrary evidence. All right, so belief perseverance, the likelihood that your beliefs will keep on going even though you hear things or you see things that are contrary or against. And so this is why most teachers, or when you're trying to, when I say think outside the box, they ask you to consider the opposite. So if you're pro something, they ask you to argue against. If you really like, oh, I don't know, a certain type of music, it makes it better to consider the opposite, right? Because you're always considering someone else's viewpoints. Okay? That is the end of Cognition Part 2 notes. I'm getting lots of complaints about how long they are. So here you are, 12 minutes today. Okay? Take any notes in class, the class that you might have. Make sure you have your vocab down. And again, this might be a good time to go back to the beginning with your objectives. Can you tell me how confirmation bias and fixation interfere with problem solving? Can you tell me the difference between representative and availability heuristics? And can you think of good and bad things about overconfidence? We didn't really talk about advantages of overconfidence, but that is something I want you to bring to class. All right. Why do you think it might be a good thing to be overconfident when you are a decision maker? Have a good day.